All right, Alexander, we have another debacle between Canada and Germany, and this has to do with the Gazprom. There's this technical issue, these pumps or these engines that like 10 of them that Siemens should have fixed and then returned um, back to Nord Stream 1, and everything would have been fine. But Siemens sent them to Canada. Canada said we can't fix them because of sanctions, and we can't send them back. And now you have 40% less gas, roughly 40% less gas being sent to Germany. Germany's in a panic. Habeck is losing his mind. He's blaming Putin. He's saying this is political. There could be some political stuff going on, but I don't believe that. I
Yeah.
don't think it's political because why would Russia box themselves in like this? If this was political, then it would be easy for Canada and Germany to call them out on that. You just fix these machines, these pumps, and return them back, and then you see if it's political. I mean, it's easy to figure out. But I just believe this is more sanction hysteria and just terrible leadership and diplomacy on the part of Germany and Canada because this is easily fixed. All, all Germany has to do is call Canada and say, look, we need this equipment. Can you get it back to us? Forget about sanctions on this particular thing. And Canada should say, absolutely, you're an ally, of course. I really don't understand what all the difficulty is with this.
No, no, you're entirely right. Now, can I just say, yesterday I heard that the Germans finally have now started to contact the Canadians and that there are some kind of discussions going on. Now, I am completely cynical about this business. And when I say cynical, I mean, about the Russians and what they're up to. And it may very well be that this is indeed a technical problem. But I do wonder whether the Russians weren't being a little mischievous, which is that they've used this problem of which is a real problem of the fact that this equipment can't be replaced as an excuse to dial down gas flows, knowing perfectly well that it would do two things. The first is shock the Germans, and it has shocked the Germans. I mean, I was reading an interview that was being given by a very senior German official, Mr. Müller, who is the head of he is a civil servant. He's one of the big agencies that regulates the German economy. He's saying this is a disaster. We're going to have to cut heating. Landlords are going to have to cut heating to tenants. Companies will go insolvent. Industry will have to stop. People need to start saving gas. We are going to face a terrible winter. That's all looming ahead because we're nowhere near got enough gas in our gas reserves to cover the winter, all the things that Habeck said that they would do. We're nowhere near ready for that kind of thing. So the Germans are, as you said, freaking out. So that's one thing the Russians might have achieved by this. But the other is that they've created trouble between the Germans and the Canadians. Because, the Canadians have got these sanctions. The Russians are crowing. They say Canada sanctioned Germany. And now the Germans are going to have to run to the Canadians and try and find some kind of a way. And let's say they do sort this out with the Canadians, which I'm sure they will, by the way. And, this equipment will be released. The Germans now look incredibly foolish. So I think there's just a possibility that the Russians have played this a bit. And Alexei Miller, who was Gazprom's CEO, he made some really, really interesting comments at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, which we're going to discuss later in this program. He said, well, this problem is entirely technical. We're not dealing with all of this. But the fact is gas prices in Europe are rising faster than gas flows are falling. And if you tell me that I'm not happy with that, then I would be dishonest. So, double negative. What he's basically saying is he's happy with the fact that gas prices are rising despite the reduced gas flows. So, I can't help but think that this is another way of the Russians telling everybody, the Germans, the Canadians, you just don't know what you're doing. You're completely at sea. You're sanctioning yourselves all the time. Canada is sanctioning Germany. Germany's running around having hysterics, or at least Robert Habeck is. And this is just another exercise in foolishness, which demonstrates the utter foolishness of your entire sanctions policy. So, I'm not saying that that's the case, but I would not be surprised if it was.
No, I mean, I could see the Russians saying, okay, this equipment needs to be fixed. Let's talk to the Germans and get this done with, and let's see what they do. Let's see what they do. They can't be that stupid to mess this up with Siemens' Canadian subsidiary. I can see they're saying they won't be that dumb to mess this up, and sure enough, they messed it up. It's such an easy. This should have been a non-issue. I mean, really, this should have never made the papers. But
Absolutely.
it just shows how incompetent German leadership and Canadian leadership is. It really does. It shows how incompetent they can't pick up the phone and coordinate something simple like this.
It also says something, I'm afraid, about Siemens. I mean, you'd have thought Siemens, one of Germany's biggest industrial groups, would realize that there's a problem, and that they talk first to Berlin, to the officials in Berlin and those in Ottawa, and say, look, we've got this problem, and what are we supposed to do? Unless, of course, Siemens did, and Habeck and Trudeau and his people just paid no attention, which wouldn't surprise me either. It's entirely possible. So whatever it is, I mean, it is low farce. I mean, the idea that governments in Germany and Canada can't sort this out, that's what governments are for. I mean, beyond questions of high policy, I mean, governments are there to govern. I mean, this isn't government. This is. I don't know what it is actually. I mean, it's a low farce.
Yeah. Right. Anyway, let's since we're talking about the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, the SPIEF, Putin's speech. By the time we get this video up, Putin will have already given his speech. And it's actually a little bit delayed because of some hacker issues. But by the time this video goes up, the speech would have been out. And I'm sure everyone would have seen it or read the excerpts of it. How do you think the SPIEF is going? Because the Western media is saying it's a complete failure. The rest of the world is saying everything is fine. It's really interesting to see some of the vitriol and some of the disdain that the collective West has, not only for Russia, but just for every other country. I've been reading articles where they're saying, like, the St. Petersburg Forum is not going to have elites. They actually use the word. They won't have Western elites attending, and so they have to get their B team and their C team, which means Turkish representatives and Chinese and Iranian and Venezuelan and Cubans. I mean, they really have a hatred for any culture or society that's not part of the collective West. So they see them as lower. And these are, Newsweek and Yahoo News and Business Insider that are saying, well, now that the West is not attending, this forum is, filled with a bunch of just, B team, off the bench type of players. This is not the starting, superstars that are going to be attending this forum.
Indeed, and I get it before I respond to that in terms of what's happened at SPIEF. Let me just point out that, of course, back in 2020, when certain protests were going on in the United States and when there was a certain protest wave, well, then, of course, they were talking a completely different tune. The talk about then was the West and its failings. Now, of course, we see the mask fall, and we see how completely insincere those comments back in 2020 really were. At the end of the day, they retained this overwhelming egotistical belief in their own supremacy. All those things they were saying in 2020 were purely for internal consumption, and they were purely manipulative, exactly as we said at the time. Anyway, I just wanted to get that out of the way. Now, the fact is, this is not the B team or the C team. It is the future. Western economies are declining in terms of their proportion of global GDP. The countries that are attending SPIEF are rising. Xi Jinping of China is apparently going to be, the word is that he's actually going to address the conference in a virtual format. He's had a very interesting conversation with Putin. The Iranians, as you say, are there. The Indians apparently are there in force. All sorts of countries are there. And of course, all kinds of deals will be done. And Africa, the African Union and Russia are apparently arranging a Russia-Africa summit. Turkey can supply a lot of the things that Russia needs. The only difference, the big difference is that, of course, from a Russian point of view, these other countries that we're talking about not only are in a position to fill a lot of the gaps that the Western countries have left, but they are also much more reliable trade partners. The Russians, I think, and they've made that fairly clear, have given up on the West. And what we're going to see, more signs of the Russians reorienting their trade towards the East, towards these other countries, and we're going to get a very confident speech from Putin as well. I suspect that Putin's speech, when we get the full details of it, will speak about how Russia has seen off the sanctions challenge, how it's adjusting its economy, how it's got enormous resources it can trade with. And of course, those aren't just natural resources, commodities. We've seen how important commodities are. He will also be saying that, we've got technological and industrial resources which are very much in play as well. And I strongly suspect that Putin is going to make a further point, which is going to say that this economic war, what it has demonstrated is Russia's importance to the West. So when the West says that, it's a failure for Russia, that we are not there in SPIEF in St. Petersburg, the reality is it's a failure for the West that they're not in St. Petersburg, because as things have turned out, it is they who need Russia more.
All right. Just to close out the video, do you want to get into a little bit more detail with Xi and Putin?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
we've been hearing a lot of statements over the past week between China and Russia as well, where
right.
all
Okay,
the doubts
all the doubts.
that China may be moving away from Russia. I think that we can put those to bed without.
They have been obliterated. I mean, first of all, let's go to that telephone call between Putin and Xi, which took place on Wednesday, and we're told it took place in a warm and friendly atmosphere. And I've also read somewhere, I can't confirm this, that Xi actually telephoned Putin on Xi's birthday. I mean, this is his own birthday thing. I mean, I'm not sure about that, but anyway, incredibly friendly call. And the Russians say that Xi said that the Russian military operation in Ukraine was legitimate, in other words, legal and proper. The Chinese readout was a little bit more restrained, but it said that the Chinese understand why it's done, and they've looked at the historical context and its merits, and they formed their own independent view. But the key point was, and this is from the Chinese readouts, that the two countries will support each other in terms of their core interests. And of course, the Chinese recognize that for the Russians, Ukraine is a core interest. And they will move forward with their economic cooperation. And in all fields, in finance, in natural resources, in manufacturing, in technology. Now, to my mind, that not only shows that the Chinese and the Russians, the idea that there was some kind of problems between them, I mean, that's all gone away. But it also shows that in terms of the sanctions war, it's failed, because the Russians certainly can produce a lot of the products that the West is now withholding, and they will do so. As I said, people they repeatedly underestimate the sophistication of Russia's own technology and industrial base. But if you add to that the Chinese manufacturing technology base, then, I mean, the whole thing basically ends. I mean, there is really nothing that the West can provide which China and Russia together can't make. I mean, that is the reality of the modern world. If there's some people in Washington who can't see that, or in London, or in Berlin, well, I mean, I think it's time they woke up. Or in Brussels, it's time they woke up, and that they understood that the world has changed, and changed completely.
All right, let's leave it there. The Duran.locals.com, everybody, and go to the Duran shop. 10% off when you use the code GOODDAY. Take care.